The Man with the Pale Eyes by Henry Daniel Britt Guy de Maupassant. Monsieur Pierre-Agnes Devans, the examining magistrate, was the exact opposite of a practical joker. He was dignity, staidness, correctness personified. As a sedate man, he was quite incapable of being guilty, even in his dreams, of anything resembling a practical joke, however remotely. I know nobody to whom he could be compared, unless it be the present president of the French Republic. I think it is useless to carry the analogy any further, and having said thus much, it will be easily understood that a cold shiver passed through me when Monsieur Pierre-Agnes Devans did me the honor of sending a lady to await on me. At about 8 o'clock, one morning last winter, as he was leaving the house to go to the Palais de Justice, his footman handed him a card, on which was printed, Dr. James Ferdinand, member of the Academy of Medicine, Porte-au Prince, Chevalier of the Legion of Honor. At the bottom of the card there was written in pencil, from Lady Fragier. Monsieur Devans knew the lady very well, who was a very agreeable Creole from Haiti, and whom he had met in many drawing rooms, and, on the other hand, though the doctor's name did not awaken any recollections in him, his quality and titles alone required that he should grant him an interview, however short it might be. Therefore, although he was in a hurry to get out, Monsieur Devans told the footman to show in his early visitor, but to tell him beforehand that his master was much pressed for time, as he had to go to the law courts. When the doctor came in spite of his usual imperturbability, he could not restrain a movement of surprise, for the doctor presented that strange anomaly of being a Negro of the purest blackest type, with the eyes of a white man, of a man from the north, pale, cold, clear, blue eyes, and his surprise increased when, after a few words of excuse for his untimely visit, he added, with an enigmatical smile, "My eyes surprise you." Did they not? I was sure that they would, and, to tell you the truth, I came here in order that you might look at them well, and never forget them. His smile, and his words, even more than his smile, seemed to be those of a madman. He spoke very softly, with that childish, lisping voice, which is peculiar to Negroes, and his mysterious, almost menacing words, consequently, sounded all the more as if they were uttered at random by a man bereft of his reason. But his looks, the looks of those pale, cold, clear, blue eyes, were certainly not those of a madman. They clearly expressed menace, yes, menace, as well as irony, and, above all, implacable ferocity, and their glance was like a flash of lightning, which one could never forget. I have seen, Monsieur Devans used to say, when speaking about it, the looks of many murderers, but in none of them have I ever observed such a depth of crime, and of impudent security in crime. And this impression was so strong, that Monsieur Devans thought that he was the sport of some hallucination, especially as when he spoke about his eyes, the doctor continued with a smile, and in his most childish accents, "Of course, monsieur, you cannot understand what I'm saying to you, and I must beg your pardon for it. Tomorrow you will receive a letter which will explain it all to you. But, first of all, it was necessary that I should let you have a careful look at my eyes, which are myself, my only and true self, as you will see." With these words, and with a polite bow, the doctor went out, leaving Monsieur Devans extremely surprised, and a prey to this doubt, as he said to himself, "Is he merely a madman?" The fierce expression, and the criminal depths of his looks are perhaps caused merely by the extraordinary contrast between his fierce looks, and his pale eyes. And absorbed in these thoughts, Monsieur Evans unfortunately allowed several minutes to elapse, and then he thought to himself suddenly, no, I'm not the sport of any hallucination, and this is no case of an optical phenomenon. This man is evidently some terrible criminal, and I have altogether failed in my duty in not arresting him myself at once, illegally, even at the risk of my life. The judge ran downstairs in pursuit of the doctor, but it was too late. He had disappeared. In the afternoon, he called on Madame Fragier to ask her whether she could tell him anything about the matter. She, however, did not know the Negro doctor in the least, and was even able to assure him that he was a fictitious personage. For, as she was well acquainted with the upper classes in Haiti, she knew that the Academy of Medicine at Port-au-Prince had no doctor of that name among its members. As Monsieur Evans persisted, and gave descriptions of the doctor, especially mentioning his extraordinary eyes, Madame Fragier began to laugh, and said, "You have certainly had to do with a hoaxer, my dear monsieur. The eyes which you had described are certainly those of a white man, and the individual must have been painted." On thinking it over, Monsieur Evans remembered that the doctor had nothing of the Negro about him, but his black skin, his woolly hair and beard, and his way of speaking, which was easily imitated, but nothing of the Negro, not even the characteristic, undulating walk. Perhaps, after all, he was only a practical joker, and during the whole day, Monsieur Evans took refuge in that view, which rather wounded his dignity as a man of consequence, but which appeased his scruples as a magistrate. The next day, he received the promised letter, which was written, as well as addressed, in letters cut out of the newspapers. It was as follows: Monsieur, Dr. James Ferdinand does not exist, but the man whose eyes you saw does, and you will certainly recognize his eyes. This man has committed 2 crimes, for which he does not feel any remorse, but, as he is a psychologist, he is afraid of someday yielding to the irresistible temptation of confessing his crimes. You know better than anyone, and that is your most powerful aid, with what imperious force criminals, especially intellectual ones, feel this temptation. That great poet, Edgar Poe, has written masterpieces on this subject, which express the truth exactly, but he has omitted to mention the last phenomenon, which I will tell you. Yes, I, a criminal, feel a terrible wish for somebody to know of my crimes, and when this requirement is satisfied, my secret has been revealed to a confidant, I shall be tranquil for the future, and be freed from this demon of perversity, which only tempts us once. Well, now that is accomplished, you shall have my secret. From the day that you recognize me by my eyes, you will try and find out what I'm guilty of, and how I was guilty, and you will discover it, being a master of your profession, which, by the by, has procured you the honor of having been chosen by me to bear the weight of this secret, which now is shared by us, and by us two alone. I say, advisedly, by us two alone. You could not, as a matter of fact, prove the reality of this secret to anyone, unless I were to confess it, and I defy you to obtain my public confession, as I have confessed it to you, and without danger to myself. 3 months later, Monsieur Evans met Monsieur X at an evening party, and at first sight, and without the slightest hesitation, he recognized in him those very pale, very cold, and very clear blue eyes which it was impossible to forget. The man himself remained perfectly impassive, so that Monsieur Evans was forced to say to himself, probably I'm the sport of an hallucination at this moment, or else there are 2 pairs of eyes that are perfectly similar in the world. And what eyes? Can it be possible? The magistrate instituted inquiries into his life, and he discovered this, which removed all his doubts. 5 years previously, Monsieur X had been a very poor, but very brilliant medical student, who, although he never took his doctor's degree, had already made himself remarkable by his microbiological researches. A young and very rich widow had fallen in love with him and married him. She had 1 child by her first marriage, and in the space of 6 months, First the child, and then the mother died of typhoid fever, and thus Monsieur X had inherited a large fortune, in due form, and without any possible dispute. Everybody said that he had attended to the two patients with the utmost devotion. Now, were these two deaths the two crimes mentioned in his letter? But then, Monsieur X must have poisoned his two victims with the microbes of typhoid fever, which he had skillfully cultivated in them, so as to make the disease incurable, even by the most devoted care and attention. Why not? Do you believe it? I asked Monsieur Devans. Absolutely, he replied. And the most terrible thing about it is that the villain is right when he defies me to force him to confess his crime publicly, for I see no means of obtaining a confession, none whatever. For a moment, I thought of magnetism, but who could magnetize that man with those pale, cold, bright eyes? With such eyes, he would force the magnetizer to denounce himself as the culprit. And then he said, with a deep sigh, formerly there was something good about justice. And when he saw my inquiring looks, he added in a firm and perfectly convinced voice, formerly, justice had torture at its command. Upon my word, I replied, with all an author's unconscious and simple egotism, it is quite certain that without the torture, this strange tale will have no conclusion. And that is very unfortunate, as far as regards the story I intended to make out of it. An uncomfortable bed. One autumn I went to stay for the hunting season with some friends in a chateau in Picardy. My friends were fond of practical joking, as all my friends are. I do not care to know any other sort of people. When I arrived, they gave me a princely reception, which at once aroused distrust in my breast. We had some capital shooting. They embraced me, they cajoled me, as if they expected to have great fun at my expense. I said to myself, look out, old ferret. They have something in preparation for you. During the dinner, the mirth was excessive, far too great, in fact. I thought, here are people who take a double share of amusement, and apparently without reason. They must be looking out in their own minds for some good bit of fun. Assuredly I'm to be the victim of the joke. Attention. During the entire evening, everyone laughed in an exaggerated fashion. I smelled a practical joke in the air, as a dog smells game. But what was it? I was watchful, restless. I did not let a word or a meaning or a gesture escape me. Everyone seemed to me an object of suspicion, and I even looked distrustfully at the faces of the servants. The hour rang for going to bed, and the whole household came to escort me to my room. Why? They called to me, good night. I entered the apartment, shut the door, and remained standing, without moving a single step, holding the wax candle in my hand. I heard laughter and whispering in the corridor. Without doubt they were spying on me. I cast a glance around the walls, the furniture, the ceiling, the hangings, the floor. I saw nothing to justify suspicion. I heard persons moving about outside my door. I had no doubt they were looking through the keyhole. An idea came into my head. My candle may suddenly go out and leave me in darkness. Then I went across to the mantelpiece and lighted all the wax candles that were on it. After that, I cast another glance around me without discovering anything. I advanced with short steps, carefully examining the apartment. Nothing. I inspected every article one after the other. Still nothing. I went over to the window. The shutters, large wooden shutters, were open. I shut them with great care, and then drew the curtains, enormous velvet curtains, and I placed a chair in front of them, so as to have nothing to fear from without. Then I cautiously sat down. The armchair was solid. I did not venture to get into the bed. However, time was flying, and I ended by coming to the conclusion that I was ridiculous. If they were spying on me, as I supposed, they must, while waiting for the success of the joke they had been preparing for me, have been laughing enormously at my terror. So I made up my mind to go to bed. But the bed was particularly suspicious looking. I pulled at the curtains. They seemed to be secure. All the same, there was danger. I was going perhaps to receive a cold shower bath from overhead, or perhaps the moment I stretched myself out to find myself sinking under the floor with my mattress. I searched in my memory for all the practical jokes of which I ever had experience. And I did not want to be caught. Certainly not. Certainly not. Then I suddenly bethought myself of a precaution which I consider one of extreme efficacy. I caught hold of the side of the mattress gingerly, and very slowly drew it toward me. It came away, followed by the sheet and the rest of the bedclothes. I dragged all these objects into the very middle of the room, facing the entrance door. I made my bed over again as best I could at some distance from the suspected bedstead in the corner which had filled me with such anxiety. Then, I extinguished all the candles, and, groping my way, I slipped under the bedclothes. For at least another hour, I remained awake, starting at the slightest sound. Everything seemed quiet in the chateau. I fell asleep. I must have been in a deep sleep for a long time, but all of a sudden, I was awakened with a start by the fall of a heavy body tumbling right on top of my own body, and, at the same time, I received on my face, on my neck, and on my chest a burning liquid which made me utter a howl of pain. And a dreadful noise, as if a sideboard laden with plates and dishes had fallen down, penetrated my ears. I felt myself suffocating under the weight that was crushing me and preventing me from moving. I stretched out my hand to find out what was the nature of this object. I felt a face, a nose, and whiskers. Then with all my strength I launched out a blow over this face. But I immediately received a hail of cuffings which made me jump straight out of the soaked sheets and rush in my nightshirt into the corridor, the door of which I found open. Oh stupor, it was broad daylight. The noise brought my friends hurrying into the apartment, and we found, sprawling over my improvised bed, the dismayed valet, who, while bringing me my morning cup of tea, had tripped over this obstacle in the middle of the floor, and fallen on his stomach, spilling, in spite of himself, my breakfast over my face. The precautions I had taken in closing the shutters, and going to sleep in the middle of the room had only brought about the interlude I had been striving to avoid. Ah, how they all laughed that day.